Hello everyone, welcome to another 2025 NFL Draft Position Rankings. Today we are going to be going over the top 10 tight ends in this upcoming draft class. This is actually a very good bunch. I think there's going to be a lot of starters, quality players, at least as role players, and then a couple of stars at the top as well. So let's just go ahead and dive right into it, starting at number 10 with Mitchell Evans, the tight end out of Notre Dame. He's a senior, 6'5", 260 pounds, so he's very well built. He's a full-size, inline caliber tight end. He's somebody that took over for Michael Mayer back a few years ago, and towards the end of 2023, he was really starting to put things together, but unfortunately suffered a torn ACL, and he came back this year, and he hasn't quite looked like his old self. He's still, been pretty productive, 39 receptions, 369 yards, and 3 touchdowns. That's not too bad, but he definitely doesn't quite look like the same player. I'm hoping he can get back to that, and I think being another year removed from his injury, he definitely has a chance to do so. But this is kind of a little bit of a bet more on the upside than what he showed on tape this year. It wasn't terrible, but I definitely think he's shown better on tape. Looking at kind of where he wins, it's mostly with his size in contested catch situations, having reliable hands. I don't think he's overly athletic. He's not, terrible at that for his size at 260 pounds, but he's not, routing guys up very consistently. His route running is decent, but he's just not creating a lot of separation from linebackers due to his size. He really mostly wins with tough catches over the middle of the field, going up and winning in contested catch situations, winning with his size. He is not an amazing blocker for how big he is. I think he is a guy that you do predominantly want to play on the line because of how big he is. And, he can definitely help out in chips and, in the running game, but I don't think he is this dominant elite blocker. To me, I have a 4th round grade on him. If you can get kind of a lot of the stuff that he showed last year out of him, I think he can be a really good tight end 2 caliber player. If not, he might be kind of more of a tight end 3 guy, a rotational guy that can come in, be a red zone threat, something like that. But I do like Mitchell Evans out of Notre Dame, and he is number 10 for me. Moving to number 9 for Terrence Ferguson, a senior from Oregon, 6'5", 255 pounds. He's another player that has pretty good inline caliber size. To me, he's not a fantastic blocker. I think for being how big he is, he definitely disappointed a little bit in that regard to me. He doesn't do a bad job in pass protection. I think in the running game, he can get thrown off a little bit too often, but there is some things to like. Notably, I think in the receiving game with Ferguson, his yak ability is really good. When you get the ball in his hands, in the flat, or in short areas, on the run, and let him use his athleticism against linebackers and, defensive ends dropping into coverage, I think he can be really, really good in that manner. For Oregon in 2024, had 43 catches, 591 yards, and 3 touchdowns. So definitely did have some production there. He wasn't winning super consistently in contested catch situations. They really just didn't throw it up to him that often in those. I don't see him ripping up the seam and threatening vertically too often either. But really where he wins, he has a good combination of size and athleticism. I think those are strong traits of his. And then when you get the ball in his hands and let him go to work after the catch, that's really where he thrives. So I think he's probably going to be more of like a tight end 2 move blocker type of guy. I don't think he's going to be, digging out defensive ends very consistently or being able to kind of down block and then climb to the linebacker at the second level. He can do it every once in a while, but I think really where you're going to see him be the most productive is using him on kind of rollouts on the flat, bootlegs, play action, things like that, where you can get him out on crossers, out in space, where he can use the athleticism and size and ability after the catch, and I think that's where he can be most successful. To me, I see a kind of a day 3, 4th round type of grade on him, 71.74, so pretty similar to what I see with Mitchell Evans, a guy that can contribute but is not going to likely be a focal point of your offense or a true tight end 1 either. Moving next to number 8, we have Oronde Gadsden, the second out of Syracuse. He's a redshirt junior. His dad played for the Miami Dolphins, so he has some NFL bloodlines. And he's a really interesting player because he's 6'5". He's listed at 236 pounds, but to be honest with you, I don't even think he weighs that much. So he is definitely not one of the bigger tight ends by any means. And that's reflected in kind of his size and notably his blocking grades as well. He's not an inline tight end. If you use him to, block defensive ends in the running game, in the passing game, he's just simply not going to be effective. I think even, climbing up to linebackers and in the running game, he's not super good at latching on to linebackers, latching on to defenders, and being able to, prevent them from making a play in the running game. So there's a lot of limitations, and I think he's ultimately going to be kind of relegated to a big slot role. So you're going to have an offensive coordinator that wants to have that role in his offense. He's somebody like a Mike Gesicki for the Bengals, where, he's really not used as an inline tight end much at all. They use him as a slot wide receiver, basically. And I think Gadsden is most likely going to be just a big wide receiver, essentially, in his role. He'll probably be listed as a tight end and might play as kind of a wing tight end, H-back type of role, but I think really where he's going to thrive is being able to go out on routes and win with his size. And that's really kind of where he is effective. He is a good athlete for the tight end position because he is not super big. So, he doesn't have as much mass to be carrying around. Really where he's great, though, is he has ridiculously strong hands and can win contested catches at a very high level. And that's where he's really, really effective. He doesn't separate amazingly for being, only 235 pounds or so. I don't think he's running away super consistently from linebackers and really being able to manipulate them with head fakes and good route running. Really, most of the time when he would get the ball, it was him with a defender draped all over him, and he would make a really tough catch. And that's a tough place to live in the NFL, not getting a lot of separation, relying on that. But he has great size, he can box out, and I think he has really strong hands as well. He was very productive in 2024, 73 receptions, 934 yards, and 7 touchdowns. So he showed he can do it against pretty decent competition in the ACC. You do have to have a very defined role for him, though. So that's why I see him as kind of a early day 3, round 4 type of player. I think you can definitely have a very effective role where he can be productive, but I think, if you don't have that role on your offense, he's not even going to be on your draft board because he cannot be an inline tight end. Next up at number 7, we have Elijah Arroyo out of Miami, Florida. He's a redshirt junior, 6'4", 245 pounds. Not the biggest tight end either, and one of the things to note with Elijah Arroyo is that he really has had no production before this year when Cam Ward arrived at Miami. Last year, he had 11 receiving yards. The year before, 66. The year before that, 80. So he really has not had much production at all before this year. But this year had 35 catches, 590 yards, 7 touchdowns, and was really productive within this Miami offense. Now, he is another guy that I think is going to have a very defined role at the NFL level because his size is not particularly impressive. At 245 pounds, he does struggle when he's asked to dig out a defensive end and really take on linebackers and big defensive players in the running game. His blocking ability is just not very good. Additionally, he just isn't the biggest guy, and so contested catchability, yards after contact, throwing off defenders, there's limitations in those regards. So, he has a very specific role that he's going to fill, and I think it's going to be kind of similar to Gadsden as a big slot type of player, but really what separates Arroyo is he has good athleticism, he has a really good route runner, and additionally, he can threaten up the vertical seam really well. And that's so big against cover 2, cover 3, being able to attack the middle of the field vertically. That is so beneficial for an offense, and I think Arroyo did it really, really well this year. Had 7 touchdowns, and a lot of those were him just ripping up the seam, Cam Ward trusting him to get open over the middle of the field, and Arroyo was able to do that very consistently. So I think, once again, he's going to have a very defined role. You're going to have a quarterback that needs to trust that he's going to come open over the middle of the field, that he can be a reliable weapon there. It's not like he's completely terrible at, yards after catch or contested catchability. He just didn't have a ton of those opportunities because most of the time he was ripping up the seam, making a tough catch in traffic, and then going down. So I think Arroyo is a really interesting player, and, in the rounds 3 to 4 range, I think he could be a very interesting player as kind of most likely a tight end 2 that can come in, threaten vertically, and be a nice big slot type of option for an offense. So that's what gets him to that number 7 spot for Miami here. Moving to number 6, I have Benjamin Jurasik out of Georgia. And he has pretty much no receiving production this year. In 14 games, he just had 15 receptions for 185 yards and 0 touchdowns. He's 6'4", 245 pounds, so he's not overly huge either. Jurasek is just a really well-rounded tight end, and he was somebody I had ranked within my top 10 tight ends last year when I thought he was going to be coming out when he was at Stanford. He ended up transferring to Georgia instead, which was interesting because they had, two other tight ends. And, just to kind of preface that, Oscar Delp hasn't announced whether he's coming out, so he's not included in this video. But Benjamin Jurasek is somebody I do really like. I liked him last year, and I like him this year probably even more. So his size is fine at 6'4", 245 pounds. That's a little bit smaller for a true inline tight end. His athleticism is good, but I don't think it's ridiculous. He's not, just absolutely out-athleting everybody on the field. I think he mostly just wins with really good smarts and his ability to manipulate defenders with routes. He just understands how to get open over the middle of the field. He threatens vertically really well. And one of the big things that I really liked about Ben Jurasek this year is that, when he was at Stanford, he really was not a blocker at all. He was one of those guys that would be used on crossers and, up the seam, and he was really effective in that regard. They would even give him handoffs. They liked putting the ball in his hands. Even though I don't think his yak ability is amazing, I do think that he can get the ball, use his athleticism, and be effective in that regard. But really where I think he just showed massive improvement this year was in the blocking game. And even though he's only 245 pounds, there were a lot of things on tape that you love to see in the blocking game from Ben Jurasek. In the passing game, he mirrored really effectively, was able to take on defensive ends for, a little bit and hold them off. In the running game, he would dig out defensive ends, not always, perfectly, but I think just the growth he showed in that area from last year was really impressive. So, I like just a little bit of everything that he does. I think most likely he's probably going to be an effective tight end 2 that comes in, can threaten the seam, run good routes, be a reliable blocker. He just kind of does everything pretty well, and that's what I like about Jurasek. He has dealt with some injuries as a bit of an older player, so I think I'm going to be higher on Jurasek than a lot of people, but I do like him, and I do have him inside my top 10 here at number 6. Now moving into the top 5, and at number 5 we have Mason Taylor out of LSU, a true junior, 6'5", 255 pounds. He's pretty well built. He's the son of NFL legend Jason Taylor, so has great NFL bloodlines. Interesting that we have multiple tight ends with dads that played in the NFL, but for Mason Taylor, 55 receptions, 546 yards, and 2 touchdowns. He started as a true freshman for LSU and has had, good production in all 3 years, so really good to see him break out early in the SEC and have a lot of opportunities to really grow his game. And there's a lot to like with Mason Taylor. He has good size. His athleticism is really impressive for being 255 pounds. He carries it really well and can run really effective routes. He's good at creating separation, using head fakes, manipulating defenders, finding openings, using a subtle push-off to create that distance between him and the defender. And what's great about him is he has really done a great job with reducing his drops. Not that there was a major problem before, but he has a drop percentage, less than 2%. So he has incredibly reliable hands. In contested catch situations, he is pretty decent as well. I think that, he's a little up and down in that area. He didn't have the most opportunities, but he would make some tough catches. His ability to threaten up the seam was really good. So there's a lot to like with Mason Taylor, especially in the receiving game. When it comes to him as a blocker, he's not bad at it. He can, be an inline caliber player, but I just don't think that he is consistently a major plus in the blocking game. I think that there are times where he definitely, overextends, lunges. He doesn't have the best technique. In pass protection, I think, he's all right, mirroring guys and keeping the defensive player out of his chest, but I think too often he does get caught leaning, trying to get that extra leverage and extra power, so that's definitely something he can continue to improve. From the receiving end of things, I definitely think that he can be kind of a tight end 1 when it comes to his production in that area. I see him as around 2 to 3 player, a 79.13 grade for me. So I like Mason Taylor. I think he can be a productive player. I don't see him as a bona fide superstar when he gets to the NFL, but I think he can definitely use his athleticism, his route running, his size, his really reliable hands, and turn into a reliable pass catcher for, a quarterback in the NFL. So I think Mason Taylor will be well liked across the league and will likely go sometime on day 2. Moving to number 4, I have Gunnar Helm out of Texas, senior, 6'5", 250 pounds. Helm has good size. He definitely uses his size really effectively. Even if he's only listed at 250, I think that, he plays bigger than that at times. Has good athleticism. His route running is pretty good, creates pretty good separation, especially on crossers and, routes where he's able to run away from defenders. He does that really well. Has good hands. His ability to threaten vertically and attack defenses, up the seam, over the middle of the field, I think he does that effectively as well. When you look at Gunnar Helm's profile, there's not a ton missing, in my opinion. He has good production, 60 receptions, 786 yards, and 7 touchdowns. I would say, maybe he could continue to be really good after the catch. I think he is athletic enough that he can run away from guys, but, not consistently throwing defenders off of him. His blocking is good, but it's not, special by any means. I think he can hang in the trenches, but he can continue to get stronger, bigger, and be a little bit more effective with his technique, especially in the running game, so he doesn't get caught lunging, dipping his head, things like that. And then in the contested catch game, he just didn't have a ton of opportunities. When they were throwing downfield, it was usually outside wide with Quinn Ewers, and he didn't have a ton of opportunities to go up and make tough catches over the middle of the field. So I think he can continue to show that he has those traits, but to me, he's a guy that can be a solid tight end 1. I do really like him, and I think there is going to be a team that takes him sometime on day 2 and believes that they can get a really solid starting caliber tight end out of him, and that's kind of how I see him as well. So I like Gunnar Helm here at number 4. And then moving to number 3, a guy that I absolutely love, Harold Fannin Jr. out of Bowling Green. Yes, you heard that, Bowling Green in the MAC. He's a true junior, and he declared he's 6'4", 230 pounds. So he's really not a big guy. He's more of a big wide receiver than he is a true tight end. But look at his stats. 117 receptions, the most by a tight end ever in FBS history. 1,500 yards, the most by a tight end in FBS history. And 10 touchdowns. Not to mention they used him in the running game every once in a while as well. This guy is just a true weapon. And you look at, Bowling Green, you figure he's doing this against absolute scrubs in the MAC. And while, yes, he was beating up on bad teams in the MAC, he also had 137 yards and a touchdown against Penn State. They went to the Final Four in the college football playoff. Against Texas A&M, who was a ranked team most of the year, 145 yards and a touchdown. So really, all across the board, he was doing it against poor MAC-level competition, but he was dominating the good teams that he played as well. And there's a lot to like in Harold Fannin's game. There are some shortcomings, and a lot of that has to do with his size. When you look at his blocking, he can pretty much just, every once in a while come on and seal the backside of an outside zone play, or, come on and climb up to a linebacker and try to get a hit on him. That's really the extent of it. If you're playing him in line, you're using him wrong. And you need to have an offensive coordinator that's good with having kind of a big slot kind of guy, or a guy that you just don't need to rely on as a super consistent blocker. But if you can get over that, really there's not a ton of major concerns in his game. His profile when it comes to production is absolutely ridiculous. His contested catch ability, I do like. His route running, he separates incredibly effectively. He can threaten the vertical seam, stretch defense. He has really good athleticism. The one kind of thing that I am a little bit questioning of is his true, short area lateral quickness. I'm not sure that he has great change of direction ability, but when it comes to his straight line speed, his ability to pick up yards after the catch using his athleticism, he's really, really good in that regard. And when I watch Fannin, I think a lot of Isaiah Likely, who has been pretty productive for the Ravens when he's gotten opportunities, and maybe a high-end comp would be Trey McBride, who is a little bit bigger, but I think does a lot of the same things well. So Harold Fannin Jr., a really interesting player, incredibly productive, coming out of Bowling Green. Should be really fun to see him at the Senior Bowl and see how he does. So 82.17, a round true 2 grade for me. So very, very fun to see Harold Fannin and where he might end up in this draft. Now moving into the final 2, both guys that I think could be really big superstars in this league. At number 2, I have Colston Loveland out of Michigan, a junior, 6'5", 245 pounds. This year with terrible quarterback play at Michigan, 56 receptions, 582 yards, and 5 touchdowns. Had 650 yards and 4 touchdowns last year with J.J. McCarthy, so he definitely has had some really good production. And you look at his game, he's a freak athlete. His route running and ability to separate is really, really elite. And he just does such a good job. I think if you put a linebacker on him, he is going to create separation. He has really good, reliable hands. He can threaten vertically really effectively. He's not the biggest guy at 6'5", 245 pounds. So I think that sometimes, his yak ability, he wins with athleticism, but he's not constantly throwing guys off and fighting for the extra yards. His contested catch ability is not bad, but it's not the major strength of his game. And the blocking, he can be an inline blocker, but I think he's most effective when he's, being used within the route tree. But there's a lot to like with Colston Loveland. His athleticism, his route running prowess, he just is so smooth over the middle of the field on crossing routes, in routes, digs, all these things, slants, comebacks, curls. He's just so good at getting out of the route rake, being really effective, creating separation with subtle push-offs. So I have a round 1 grade on him. He'll probably end up being a top 25 to top 20 player for me, and definitely somebody that I do think could change an NFL offense. And you look at teams like the Chargers or the Colts that need some help at tight end, I think Loveland will absolutely have to be in the conversation for a lot of those teams. And then at number 1, Tyler Warren out of Penn State. He has just consistently climbed up these rankings, and I think a lot of people had him within the top 5 coming into the year, but he has just earned this spot straight up. He's a senior, 6'6", 261 pounds, and we talked a lot about ridiculous production out of Harold Fannin. Tyler Warren also has absurd production for the tight end position. 104 receptions, over 1,200 yards, and 8 receiving touchdowns. And Warren is just such a well-rounded, balanced tight end that is really, really good in so many facets of the game. And they line Warren up everywhere just to try to get him involved. He is constantly used as a wildcat quarterback where he will throw the ball, run the ball, hand the ball off. He, takes quarterback sneaks consistently. He'll line up in the backfield, out wide as a wide receiver, in the slot, in line. He can just be moved around, and a offensive coordinator that can get creative with him is going to love the things that he can do with Tyler Warren. And he is just so good. And there's just so much to like about Warren's game. His size allows him to be such a monster after the catch. He's so good in that regard. Just throwing off defenders, fighting for the extra yards. I personally am a big sucker for tight ends that can just throw off defenders, fight for extra yards on every single time they get the ball over the middle of the field. He's also a great contested catch weapon. According to PFF, there were 21 contested catch opportunities. He caught 13 of them, which is just about 62%, which is just a fantastic mark. And then, his size also allows him to be a great blocker as well. I think he is one of the few tight ends in this class that provides great balance between those. Some guys that just missed the list, Jackson Hawes, CJ Dupree out of Alabama. Both of those guys are great blockers, but they provide pretty much nothing in the receiving game. Most of the other guys on this list are big-time receivers, but don't have much when it comes to the blocking game. Warren is the most well-rounded tight end in this class, has really reliable, good hands. The one thing with Warren is he doesn't create a ton of separation sometimes, and that's because I don't think he's a special athlete. At 261 pounds, he's really, really good, but he's just not creating a ton of separation as a true receiver. And I do think there is kind of a lack of some route running advanced techniques that maybe he can continue to get better at, but he also does a good job of using a subtle push off to create separation. And also, if you do end up throwing it to him and there's not a ton of separation, you were pretty confident that he's going to at least make it a 60-40 ball instead of a true 50-50. So Warren is a really good player. I do have a true round 1 grade on him as well. I don't think either one of these guys are close to Brock Bowers in terms of how good they are coming out, but I think both of them will be tight end ones and guys that do ultimately go within the top 25 picks and are really effective tight end ones for their team. So let me know your thoughts on the tight ends in the 2025 NFL draft down below. Who do you want your favorite team to draft? Who do I have too high or too low? Please, if you like this kind of content, hit that subscribe button down below. Don't want to miss any of the mock draft, scouting reports, player rankings that I will be putting out over the next few months. So, please hit that like button as well while you're down there. It just truly helps support the channel. Thank you all so much for watching. I will catch you in the next one.